I'm 95 years old as I sit here saying this out loud, and I've learned something surprising about age. It doesn't make memories fade the way people say. If anything, it makes the important ones heavier. They stop drifting, they settle, and some of them refuse to let you go until you finally acknowledge them. For over half a century, I lived with a secret so strange that even now, telling it feels like stepping off a cliff. Not because I fear mockery anymore. I'm too old for that, but because once spoken, it becomes real in a way it never was before. A thing that existed safely in the quiet corners of my life suddenly belongs to the world. What happened to me didn't occur all at once. It unfolded slowly, stretched across decades, shaped by loss, solitude, and a forest that seemed to remember things humans had forgotten. Between 1977 and 2002, in the northern stretches of Washington's backcountry, I shared part of my life with a being that by all accepted standards should not exist. My name is Leonard Cole. In the fall of 1977, I was 49 years old and newly widowed. My wife, Evelyn, died in August after a long illness that hollowed her out piece by piece. Watching someone fade that way changes how you see time. Days stretch, weeks blur. When it was over, the silence was unbearable. Our home in Mount Vernon felt hostile, like every wall was accusing me of surviving. I tried staying, I truly did. Friends brought casseroles, neighbors checked in, people told me, it gets easier, which I learned is just a polite way of saying you'll learn to carry it. I didn't want to carry it there, so I left, using savings from years spent as an equipment mechanic and a small inheritance Evelyn had insisted we never touch. I bought undeveloped land northeast of Darrington, 38 acres of dense forest, shaped by elevation and water. The property included a rundown cabin built sometime in the early 1960s, barely more than a wooden box with a stove, a cot, and an outhouse set back among the trees. There was no electricity, no phone line, no nearby homes. The road washed out half the year. It felt right. I moved in before winter fully set, hauling what little I owned in a dented pickup: tools, canned food, blankets, a kerosene lantern, a battered radio, and a rifle I hoped not to use. I wasn't chasing solitude for spiritual reasons. I just needed somewhere quiet enough that my thoughts wouldn't echo back at me. The forest obliged. The first year passed without incident. I repaired the roof, reinforced the porch, learned when the creek rose and when it shrank into clear, narrow ribbons. Learned how deep snow could bury sound so completely that even your own footsteps felt intrusive. I learned how grief behaves when it has room. The second year was when things changed. It was late October of 1978. The nights had begun to carry that wet cold unique to the Cascades, the kind that seeps into joints and never quite leaves. I woke before dawn to a noise that yanked me out of sleep, so fast my heart raced. It wasn't an animal call I recognized. It wasn't wind or weather. It was deeper, strained, repetitive, like breathing forced through damage. I grabbed the rifle automatically, more out of instinct than fear, and followed the sound downhill toward the creek. Fog clung to the forest floor, thick enough to blur distance. Every shape looked wrong, exaggerated. Near a bend in the water, I saw what I thought was a shadow twisted under fallen timber. Then it moved. A massive shape lay beneath a toppled fir, one side trapped. Dark hair covered its body, tangled with leaves and debris. One arm pushed uselessly against the ground, fingers digging into wet soil, and then it turned its head and looked at me. There's no good language for describing that moment. Whatever understanding I had of the natural world rearranged itself instantly. The face that met my eyes wasn't human, but it wasn't animal either. Heavy brow, broad nose, jaw built for power, hair streaked with gray along the chin and temples. but the eyes were unmistakable. They were aware. He didn't snarl, didn't roar. He watched me carefully, alert and calculating, as if weighing outcomes. When he tried to move and failed, a sound escaped him that I recognized without knowing why. Pain. I raised the rifle and felt my hands refuse to cooperate. The world didn't slow down. It narrowed. The creek faded. The trees disappeared. There was just me and something that shouldn't exist, bleeding into the forest floor. He lifted one hand slowly, deliberately, and gestured toward his trapped leg. Then he looked back at me. I lowered the rifle. I still don't know exactly why. Maybe because I'd spent 2 years watching someone die without being able to stop it. Maybe because loneliness dulls fear. Maybe because killing something that was clearly asking felt like crossing a line I'd never come back from. I freed him with shaking hands. It took nearly an hour to break enough of the fallen trunk away to release his leg. He endured it silently, body trembling, breath short. I dressed what wounds I could, splintered the leg with branches and torn belt leather, and backed away once I was finished. He watched me the entire time. When he finally stood, he had to lean heavily on nearby trees. He paused, met my eyes one last time, then disappeared into the forest with surprising speed given his injuries. I stood there until the cold numbed me. The next morning, there was a freshly killed trout laid carefully on my porch. That was when I knew it hadn't been a dream. From that point on, we existed on parallel tracks that crossed at unpredictable intervals. Food I left disappeared overnight. Objects appeared in return. Berries, mushrooms, once a perfectly intact bird with its feathers arranged almost ceremonially. I rarely saw him at first, only movement, sound, large impressions pressed deep into muddy earth. Then one evening in summer of 1979, I spotted him watching me from the tree line. He stood upright, taller than I remembered, nearly 8 feet. His stance relaxed but alert. The injured leg carried a slight hitch, but held firm. Silver threaded through his fur, more prominently now. I did something without thinking. I raised my hand. After a moment's hesitation, he mirrored the gesture. That was when I first thought of a name. Not because I believed he needed one, but because I did. I called him Ridge, after where he always appeared, halfway between the clearing and the slope beyond. Time after that felt suspended, while the world beyond the forest rushed forward. Technology, news, noise. My life slowed into something deliberate. Ridge watched me work. I watched him watch. It became unspoken routine. He showed up at dawn or dusk, never at full dark, never at midday, always keeping distance unless invited closer. As years passed, it became clear. Ridge was far more than an animal following food. He observed patterns, cause and effect, emotion. Once frustrated beyond reason by a broken tool, I cursed and threw it across the clearing. Ridge picked it up, examined it, and repaired it with patient precision. Slow movements, careful adjustments, no wasted effort. Then he handed it back to me. The lesson was humiliating. Another time, after I spoke too freely in town about strange things in the woods, hunters showed up uninvited. Ridge vanished for 3 months. When he returned, he brought me a single smooth stone and placed it in my palm like a test. I passed it by keeping my mouth shut for the next 20 years. As trust deepened, so did the lessons. He showed me cruelty born not of necessity, but convenience. He showed me how humans scar trees and land simply to leave proof of themselves behind. He demonstrated restraint, raising his hand as if to destroy something, then stopping, choosing not to. He understood choice. In the early 90s, Ridge stepped inside my cabin for the first time. He studied photographs with solemn focus. My wedding, old friends, faces now gone. When he touched my wife's image, and then touched my face, I understood that he knew what loss was. He once brought another of his kind, a smaller one, only briefly, only long enough for me to grasp what trust cost them. She never approached the cabin. She left quickly. Ridge watched her go with a posture I can only describe as mourning. By the late 90s, we were both failing. My heart began to misfire. My hands grew stiff. Ridge moved slower, his breathing heavier. Logging crept closer, trails widened, the forest shrank. Our meetings became acts of quiet coexistence rather than instruction. In early spring of 2002, Ridge appeared one final time. He was thinner than I'd ever seen him. His fur patchy, his movements deliberate and tired. We sat together on the porch and watched the forest wake, birds calling, water rushing, sunlight threading through branches. Before he left, he placed a small bundle of his fur in my hand and closed my fingers around it. Then he stood, paused, and disappeared into the trees. I never saw him again. I left the cabin 2 years later. The land is preserved now, protected. What Ridge taught me took most of my life to understand. Connection requires patience. Forgiveness is a decision. Presence is the greatest offering any creature can give another. The true mystery isn't what shared that forest with me, it's why we refuse to notice what's been watching us all along. I'm 95 years old now, and I was never alone.